The Dershow.
Does advocating genocide against the Jews violate the rules? They weren't asked whether it violates the First Amendment. That's a complicated question, but whether it violates the rules of Harvard. We know that a student who advocated genocide against blacks, or the raping of women, or the lynching of blacks, or the shooting of gays would not be accepted to Harvard. And if he was accepted, his acceptance would be rescinded. I know I represented somebody at a major university that just said something that was construed as negative about transgender people, and his application, his acceptance was withdrawn. But has anybody's acceptance been withdrawn by what people have said about Jews? And so President Gay refused to answer the question. And she got so much pushback that finally she issued like her 17th statement. We'll talk about that in a second, but here's what she said finally. Let me be clear. You'll see she's anything but clear. But you can always tell when somebody starts by saying, let me be clear, it's unlikely she will be clear. So you'll see how unclear she was. Let me be clear. Calls for violence or genocide against the Jewish community or any religious or ethnic group are vile and have no place at Harvard. Have no place at Harvard. Now this is the unclear. And those who threaten our Jewish students will be held to account. Now, threaten is very different from calling for genocide against Israel or against the Jewish people, or saying Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, free of Jews, or the Middle East will be cleaned of the vile, dirty Jews. That's really different from saying those who threaten our Jewish students. We know from yesterday that if a teacher in a classroom says, you, Goldberg, after class, I'm going to kill you. Okay, yeah, that's a threat. But is it a threat to say the world would be much better off without Jews? Was Adolf Hitler threatening a particular Jew? Was he threatening Jewish students at the University of Heidelberg or Berlin when in Mein Kampf, he basically said the world would be a better place without Jews? What he said to the German people was, if you rid the world of Jews, Germany and the Germans will be better off. Now, the First Amendment actually distinguishes between direct threats and advocacy. You can advocate under the First Amendment. Mein Kampf is protected speech. You can say under the First Amendment, different from Harvard's rules. Under the First Amendment, you can say, we think that the Jews of Palestine should be exterminated. You can say that. That's protected speech. It's vile, horrible speech, as she said, is vile. She acknowledged that. But it is protected speech under the First Amendment. The First Amendment, to bring speech outside of its protection, requires direct incitement of violence. Essentially, it means you have to be standing in front of a group of people and you have to incite them to do something violent. I had a case many years ago, early in my career, that was a cutting edge case on that issue. My client was a professor at Stanford University, a Stalinist. He pronounced himself to be a Stalinist and a Maoist. He loved Stalin and Mao. He didn't think Marx and Trotsky were any good, just Mao and Stalin. And this was during the Vietnam War. It was when I was a visiting scholar at the Center for Advanced Study of Behavioral Sciences at Harvard, and I was asked by the ACLU to defend this vile character, and I have defended many vile characters, and he was one of them. He got up in front of the Computation Center, and he said, the Computation Center is used to help the war effort in Vietnam, and therefore I think it would be a good idea. I think it would be a good idea if somebody were to take over the Computation Center. immediately thereupon, students went over and took over the computation center and engaged in property destruction. And so the issue was whether Professor Franklin's speech was an incitement to violence or merely advocacy of violence. Now, Stanford is a private university, and they ultimately decided that it was enough to dismiss him. And he was the first tenured professor fired from a major university since McCarthyism. This was 1971, 2, 3. The case lasted for quite some time, and ultimately a resolution was arrived at, and he transferred and he went to Rutgers, where he continued to advocate violence. I'm sure if he's still alive today, he'd be advocating Hamas's position. I have little doubt about that, even though I think he was Jewish. But, so was Norman Finkelstein and many other self-hating Jews and Israel-hating Jews. But the distinction between incitement, which is prohibited by law and can be prohibited by law under the First Amendment, incitement, direct incitement, and advocacy, it's a hard line to draw often. But the mere statement that Jews should be subject to genocide, if stated as a general proposition or as a proposition about Jews in the Middle East and Palestine, is protected speech. But that wasn't the issue. The issue is whether it violates Harvard's standards. Now, to see whether or not Harvard standards are violated, you have to go back and look at what it's done to other people who have made other statements about other groups, or what they would say about other people who will make statements about other groups. And of course, the school would never tolerate statements calling for the death of gays, the lynching of blacks, the raping and mutilating of women. They would figure out a way of making sure that that person was not part of the Harvard community. And if that's the case, then the question becomes, is Harvard applying a double standard when it says that is not a dismissible offense if directed against Jews? It's only a dismissible offense if directed against others.